So this is Nightmarish Beasts and the Invitation of a Child's Heart by Jay Wilburn. Nightmares were never supposed to be real. Let's say everyone told her. Is that right? No, she's not asking people. She's keeping this to herself. All right. So nightmares are never supposed to be real. Kelly knew that in her head, but there was no denying something was going on. Her sister was married and her brother had left for college. This didn't feel like the sort of thing she could tell her parents. It would just be dismissed, or they would try to talk her out of her crazy notions that she traveled to another world in her dreams. Kelly had Googled, I think that's lowercase when you Google something, isn't it? Kelly had Googled every article she could find on dream analysis. Most of the images in her dream life were explained by stress or fear. It was always assumed that the dreams weren't real. Let me put in a missing word there. Except for the hippy-dippy sites that weren't much help either. She dreaded going to sleep, and she never woke up rested. Her parents noticed sometimes, saying she didn't look so good, or asking her if she was messing around with drugs or boys. She wasn't, but she sometimes wondered which one would bother her father the most, the drugs or the boys. Her problem was the dragon and all the other various monsters from the Nightmare Kingdom. Sometimes she tried to stay awake. The whole night. Other times she didn't bother. Eventually, she slept every night. One way or the other. And Bradel was there to greet her. The great beast spread its wings in the darkness over her, where she rose from the edge of the cliff. The wind was bitter cold, and the stars and thick constellations, all alien to Earth, twinkled like light off chips of ice. Bradel spread his leathery wings and stretched his neck to give an awful echoing roar. The spines of his armored sides clicked against and away from each other as he stretched. She was confused more than usual. It was almost always daylight when she awoke in this place. Also, this was not where she left out from when she'd woken up back in the real world. Let's say the previous morning. Kelly wondered what happened to her body when she wasn't here. She knew her body in the world everyone considered real was asleep in bed. But there must be an unattended form of herself here, or how else could she have been moved? Dreams operated by their own logic. You came into them in mid-story based on what your brain had conjured. But this Nightmare Kingdom was something different. Other people didn't dream like this. Alright. Did you bring me here, you awful beast? Bradel just roared again. Enough of that, monster. I already have a headache. Let me put the quotation marks at the end of this. Alright. Kelly, in her dream form, adjusted the straps of her plate mail armor. She checked her side and found her broadsword still sheathed there. A couple years ago, she would have thought this was the greatest adventure of all. The reality of a world full of monsters and violence stole much of the magic from a land full of full of, let's say, the darkest of magic. Okay. Bradel finally knelt and presented the saddle harness behind his wings. Kelly sighed and climbed on. She supposed she had a choice. But then again, did she really? All right, very good. I like that sentence. If I can just get to where I like all the others, we're good. Before she could finally secure herself in, Bradel leapt into the frigid air and plummeted off the cliff into a canyon deeper than any on Earth, maybe deeper than any in the natural solar system. Her ears popped with the changes in pressure from the sudden loss of altitude, but her focus remained on holding herself in place to avoid falling to her death. She wasn't sure what death meant for her. Meant here, sorry. For the little girl version of herself laying in bed, stirring fitfully through her dreams. She knew that there was pain here. The most she had ever felt anywhere. She sensed that death ruled in both worlds. And she did not want to be claimed early in any, say in either place. Okay, I like that. Bradel finally used his wings to power himself forward. It was still hell to hold on, but she took a moment to secure herself between lunges of flapping wings. The dragon gave one burst of flame that lit up the rocky landscape below. All right. There were many things down there that had no corresponding form in the other world. Even the greatest natural beasts would cower at any one of those dark shapes hunting between the rocks down there. Then the beast picked up, then her flying beast picked up speed. Alright, Kelly's hands and face were numb after hours of flying. Snot and saliva had frozen to her cheeks, and she endured the sting of windburn. As light broke the horizon in the direction east lay in this world, the lights of a castle came into view below and ahead of them. Bradel dove toward the walls. "We need an army to attack this place," Kelly protested. "You are a foolish creature for bringing me here alone." "No army would ever survive crossing the barren land below them. But that was beside the point. And it wasn't Kelly's problem. Well, she supposed the dragon had made it her problem. But it shouldn't have been this way. None of this should be. Alright. Very good. I like that. I should like it. I just wrote it. If I didn't like it, why did I put it there? The dragon roared back in response, and that sound brought motion from the castle they closed in upon. Kelly cursed. Hold on, let me fix a word here. A typo, if you will. It was one of the really bad ones that she'd never say in the world where her parents could get her. Black arrows and rocks flew through the air toward them. As they drew closer to the castle, the near misses grew nearer. Bradle dove and rolled to avoid the swarms of sharp projectiles. Kelly threw up a little in her mouth and forced it back down, acidic and bitter. I need to fix this too. As Bradle flew, the arrows soared close enough. Oh, come on now. All right, I screwed that up. All right. Okay, close enough. Arrows continued to fly as Bradle dove close enough to spray the walls and interior courts with a spread of fire. There we go. Screams rose from the inferno, but Kelly couldn't tell if those were human cries. Then something black and serpentine rose on the hot winds and out of the burning light. This gargantuan beast that dwarfed even Bradle struck them in the air. No amount of harnessing would keep her in place through this. She found herself weightless for a few seconds as she was thrown from the dragon's back. The beasts fought one another and sounded too much like giant cats as they hissed and screeched at one another. Clawing at one another. Then her weight returned, and she fell like a stone. The walls of the castle raced by her almost close enough to reach out and touch. Right up until the final moment, she thought Bradle would swoop down to save her. Fantasy adventures, even the darkest kind like these, were never meant to end with the heroine dashed upon jagged rocks below. The shock of hitting the rocks would never leave her memory. All right, Kelly jolted awake in her twisted sheets, soaked in sweat. She still felt the pain of striking those rocks under the castle. Her back was in agony, her legs ached. She felt around to be sure nothing was broken, and though she appeared whole, she feared moving too much would cost her. You were supposed to lay still after... Hold on, let me make this a new paragraph. You were supposed to lay still after a great fall. If you moved, you could sever your spine and never walk again. But she was in bed, exactly where she had fallen asleep. Dreams were just dreams. Everyone knew that. Still, she had felt the fall. She had fallen. Kelly knew it was so. She must have died over there. So what did that mean here? Was dream death like an infection that might spread to her living body here in bed? All right. Not sure about those paragraphs, but I'm going to leave them in for now. She considered calling her parents. Let's say calling out for her parents. She considered calling out for her parents. It was still dark outside. The light of her alarm clock shone blue and weird across one wall and in the corner of her ceiling. Let's say and into the corner of her ceiling. She could look to see the time, but she still didn't want to turn her neck. I have to stay awake, she said out loud in a gravelly voice. Kelly needed a drink of water, but she wasn't moving to get it. She wiggled her fingers and then wiggled her toes. Everything seemed fine. Kelly didn't realize she was falling asleep again until she gasped fully awake. If she went back now, would she be in her broken body upon those rocks? Would that be what brought death to her in this world? She couldn't possibly stay awake forever. So she was already dead, she decided. It was only a matter of time. But she didn't want to give up. All right. Stay awake, stay awake, stay awake. But eventually she dozed off again. Kelly dropped back into herself, screaming. Her body was broken here. It took her a moment to realize she was no longer outside, and she wasn't alone in this confined room. Along the edges of the uneven walls, trolls stared out at her with beady, hateful eyes. She wondered if they occupied the castle. If so, how had they convinced some great monster to serve them? The scant light of their cooking fire showed their jagged teeth and their wretched forms. Gotta talk bad about trolls, right? Kelly tried to move but couldn't. She was broken, in agony, and perhaps about to be eaten alive. She lifted one arm, seeing the bone sticking out of the flesh near the elbow. It made her sick to her stomach. She almost wished she was dead. All right. Blood coated her skin on that side, and one of these things had removed most but not all of her armor. Maybe it just flew off of her when she hit the ground. One of her friends had told her that his cousin had been hit by a car and flew right out of his shoes. Excuse me. Alright, flew right out of his shoes. She wasn't sure that was possible, but maybe that was how it happened with her. Here. She was about to start screaming again, but then the bone drew back into her skin, reset itself, and healed. Let me put a comma there. I'm a big fan of the Oxford comma. How do you guys feel about it? Reset itself and healed over into one solid bone again. It happened so fast that she gasped in shock more than pain. The wound closed before her eyes and her arms straightened. The trolls watching this spoke to one another in their tittery, clicking language. She'd always expected trolls to have deep, foreboding voices, but in this world, let me put a comma there. In this world, they were shrill and headache-inducing. Let me put a dash there. All right. It didn't help that she bounced her head off of... It didn't help that she had bounced her head off some rocks after an impossible fall. 3 loud cracks accompanied her ribs popping back into place inside her. That hurt like hell. Then one of her lungs reinflated, and Kelly took a sharp, deep breath. I'll put a comma there, too. I'm just going to sprinkle commas everywhere. That's what my English teachers used to complain about when I was in high school. They talked about kids using commas too much. They wanted to take a bunch of points off, which I think resulted in most kids just writing simple sentences to avoid commas because we didn't want to lose 30 points. Wasn't probably the best way to teach us how to use commas. She hadn't realized how little oxygen she had been getting until her body caught back up on it. What's happening? Her voice came back to her, harsh off the stone of this lair. The trolls apparently took that as an invitation and charged. Clubs, spears, and poorly formed blades came at her from all sides. The small cave lit up with a wave of fire that washed through. The trolls screamed as they flailed about in flames. Kelly screamed too, as she realized she had ignited as well. She had ignited as well. And just as her bones were knitting back together. All right. Bradle pressed into the cave too small for his bulk. Kelly glimpsed deep wounds and purple blood on his sides. He tore at the trolls as they tried to escape around him. Let's say she wasn't sure whether she should feel grateful or not. It was difficult to be grateful when you were on fire. I think everybody can agree with that. It's hard to be grateful when you're on fire. But that's what you get for flying around with dragons. Kelly blacked out from the agony. Let's say the sizzling agony. There you go. Just gross enough. All right. Her eyes opened and closed. Let's fix a typo while we're here. Nothing better than typos. Her eyes opened and closed several times. It took her a while to realize she was in motion. It took her longer to understand she was inside an ambulance and not flying along on the back of a dragon. Ambulances in this world. Dragons and trolls in the other. There we go. I like that little sentence fragment. Kelly, can you hear me? It was one of the paramedics, an adult she did not know. What happened? Where's my mother? She wouldn't say mother. Where's my mom? Can you hear me, Kelly? Yes, why am I here? He answered, but his voice slurred and echoed. At first she wondered what was wrong with him, but then realized she was going back down into the darkness. No, I don't want to wake up burned. All right, I need to put an exclamation point there. You shouldn't edit exclamation points in. You should be editing them out. But if you use them sparingly, they can be useful. All right. Even the strictest editors would agree with that. Dead and scarred portions of her charred flesh fell away from raw pink skin that had grown together and healed as she watched. All right, sorry if that's a little gross. There was no time to relax or finish healing as the long black monster caught up with them again. Its skin, wrong kind of its. Its skin was slimy and oily. Each time Bradle breathed fire over its side, some of those oils ignited. I've already used the word ignited. So let's do lit up with a sickly green glow. But soon the strange flames went out and the battle continued. You need a U in continued. That's how all the cool kids do it. Kelly gritted her teeth and charged. She raised her sword high and braced herself as the dark monster prepared to breathe death upon her. She dodged to the side just as the noxious stream of acid coated the ground and even melted the rocks where she had been. She wasn't sure. Say entirely. She wasn't entirely sure it had been a conscious move or if she had just staggered from being dropped onto rocks and then burned alive. Not that long ago in this world where there were no ambulances. Kelly had no desire to come back from that injury. No, to come back from acid burns after being dropped, broken, and burned already today. All right, she charged. We've already done charged. She, we'll just use a plain old ran. She ran under the attack, trying not... She ran under the attack, trying not to breathe in the terrible fumes. The beast twisted to fall upon her, but she swung her sword as she dove. The blade sliced deeper through the ebony monster's throat than she thought it would. Following through, she found herself tumbling down the slope beyond. She figured, say Kelly figured that pain would pale in comparison to everything else, but falling down that hill hurt an awful lot. Alright, there we go. Feel better about this story as we go. Dark blood spilled inky thick from the creature's gaping throat. It started to thrash, and Bridle dove in to sink his teeth into the monster's weakness. The dragon sounded like it was gargling or choking on whatever was bleeding out of that wound. Okay, that's kind of gross. Then he breathed fire straight into the wound and down the exposed air pipe. Kelly had just started to stand when the beast exploded. Let's say when the great dark beast exploded. Burning oils, charred flesh, and Bradle himself flew in every direction. The force of the blast lifted her off her feet and sent her bouncing across the rocky plain. Even more pain, if that was possible. So even more pain racked through her, if that was possible. She stood again and found herself not alone. Emerging from the hills and rocks in the distance were more and more nightmarish beasts, things with many arms and insectile faces charged toward her. They had been alerted by all this clamor. All right, I think I spelled that the English way instead of the American way. All right, that had they had been alerted from all this clamor, and they wanted their share of the senseless violence that was the way of things in this place. All right, I was going to get fancy there, but we'll just say place. All right, Kelly sighed and lifted her weapon once more. What happened to my armor? Bradle, despite all the damage he had taken, passed over her in the air and swept the ground with his exhaled flames. There we go. Some of the new creatures in this attacking menagerie fell, others fled, but most kept coming. Why am I here? Because your heart invites it. Kelly spun around to see an armed man and woman right beside her. She swung her blade on them. He parried her with his own sword, and the woman, apparently a sorceress, clipped Kelly with a burst of energy, staggering her a few steps away. After everything she'd been through, the little bump of magic barely stung at all. Watch it with that thing, Kelly Belly. That thing is sharp. No, sure I said thing, so let's say that's sharp. Kelly lowered her sword at the nickname. Kyle, Katrina. I don't know why her parents are naming everybody K names, but that happens every once in a while. This was her brother and sister from the other world. Everyone's real world. But they were here. And part of this dream world. There we go. How are you here? Are you real? We can explain later, Katrina said. Right now, they're trying to wake you up. You need to go. This has gotten out of hand. Kelly rolled her eyes at her big sister. In leather armor. And a purple cape. There we go. If I could control it, Kelly said, I wouldn't be here at all. You can control it, Kyle said. You just have to learn. How? Show me. Not yet, Katrina said. Not yet. The next blast of energy from her sister sorceress erased everything Kelly saw. It didn't hurt this time, but she felt herself consumed and lost in the darkness that followed. Kelly opened her eyes in a hospital room. She sat up to find herself attacked by machines. That'd be a whole different story, wouldn't it? In one world, she's fighting dragons. In the other, she's fighting living machines. Kelly opened her eyes in a hospital room. She sat up to find herself attached to machines and at least one IV. Her brother slept in one chair and her sister in another. They lived far away. How were they here now? Where were her parents? What was happening to her body over there in the world of monsters? She'd find out when she fell asleep here again. And she didn't want to know what terrible lair she'd find herself in when that finally happened. They had been there. Her siblings knew of the other world. The Nightmare Kingdom. And they'd said she could control it. That she was inviting it. Another exclamation point. Wake up, she said. Her siblings stirred but didn't wake. Wake up. Someone from the hallway stuck her head in. Come on now. Did you finally wake up on us? Wake up for us. Kelly, you had everyone very... She screamed so loud that her voice cracked, and she sounded very much like a shrill troll in her own ears. Wake up!